I'm Celia, and this is my second reading vlog. I'm going to be doing what I read in February. I'm totally a mess right now. My whole room's a mess, as you can see, and I probably should have just brushed through my hair or something before filming this. But I have an excuse, and it is because my leg is broken. Not my leg, my foot is broken, and I am home from school sick today, which might be evident in my voice, so we'll see how this goes. So, my general theme for February was that I wanted to read more nonfiction, which I think I definitely did, and I wanted to read books about love, because it's February, the month of Valentine's Day, and also because I'm currently dating someone, and I really haven't experienced, being in a relationship for a long time ever in my life, so I wanted this to be, oh jeez, I'm getting so hot. I can tell that I'm sick. I wanted this to be a month about kind of learning about love and how it works and stuff like that. And relationships and relationship issues, so a lot of the books had to do with that. And yeah, I'm going to start from my least favorite books and work my way up to my favorite books I read this month. And 2 books were rereads, so they're probably actually my favorite books I read this month, but I put them lower because I've already read them, so yeah. Okay, my least favorite book I read this month was Astrid Sees All by Natalie Standiford. It's about this girl named Astrid, and her dad dies, and she becomes a fortune teller at a New York City nightclub in the 80s. It's basically the plot. She needs money, and she has this friend whose name I don't really remember, because I read this a really long time ago. And I actually DNF'd this, which means did not finish, because I just really wasn't that into it. I thought I was going to be because it said in the blurb that it was for people who liked novels by Patti Smith and who liked, Fleabag type things. And I thought it was really going to be a book about obsessive friendship and really focus in on the friendship between Astrid and the, jealousy and resentment that lied there. And if it was, I didn't get to that part. The part I was reading was mostly about, drugs in New York City in the 80s and people having a good time partying. Not really, actually. People having a bad time with drugs and not being able to pay for their apartments and using really weird slang words that kind of just took me out of it. So yeah, that was probably my least favorite. Sorry to Astrid Sees All. I think I might need to give it another try, just because I read online that it was more about the friendship, and I guess I just didn't get to that part, and I wish that I would have, because that's what I really wanted to read about. The next book that I read was The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. This book I read because I wanted to learn more about love and relationships, and I did not love it. Mostly I think because it was solely a advice book, self-help book. It seemed to focus on very general ideas about love and how to love, not necessarily just in relationships, in all of life, such as cure emotional wounds from your childhood, be understanding with the people around you, don't let people treat you badly. And I kind of felt like those are things that I know and I hear a lot about, and maybe this book did that before all the other self-help books started talking about that, but I just kind of felt like it's been done before. I didn't find it particularly interesting. I mean, it seemed to be written in a good, interesting, engaging voice. Don Miguel Ruiz really talks like an expert. Yeah, I just kind of felt like maybe I'm not that into straight self-help books, and this book felt very much like a straight, just self-help book. There's a book later on in this video that I think did exactly what this book wanted to do, but a lot better, in my opinion, for capturing my interest. Also, this book seemed to have a lot of weird victim-blaming moments, where it was kind of almost saying, if you're being treated poorly, it's because you're allowing yourself to be treated poorly. And it's like, okay, I can see the argument there for maybe telling people to stick up for themselves more, but it felt a little bit odd to me. The next book I actually listened to because I got the app Libby, which is now officially my favorite thing. I don't really like listening to like fiction books, but I found that nonfiction can be more engaging. Sorry, I'm sick. Can be more engaging if I listen to it in comparison to reading it, and I also don't feel the same amount of needing to focus on like looking at the words as I do when I read fiction, because when I read fiction I like to focus more on word choice than in nonfiction novels. Anyways, so the next book on my list was A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, which is a really great classic feminist, I don't know what to call it, like long essay novel. It was fine. It was definitely very revolutionary and interesting when it came out, obviously, because then feminism was really a crazy idea, and the idea that a woman could be a writer and she needs resources to be a writer, and the fact that there aren't many women writers is because they don't have the resources necessary, was a very interesting and revolutionary idea. Now I found it like interesting to look back historically at all of the issues that women were facing at the time, but it doesn't feel particularly relevant to today, especially because it only really addresses women who are in the same circumstances as Virginia Woolf was. So like having a good amount of money, being white, being pretty privileged, and so now it doesn't feel like quite as hot of a take, and Virginia Woolf is a great writer. Her use of language is just extraordinary and flows really, really well. So yeah, that's why A Room of One's Own isn't higher on my list, but it was still. The next thing I read was Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, and I thought this was a really great collection of essays and speeches and interviews. I particularly loved the interview, just because I thought the way that she spoke was so interesting. The way she was talking about how she's always felt really connected to reading more than anything else in her life, and how it's really defined how her brain works. I just found that really interesting because I don't think that's particularly relatable to a lot of people. Like, I was just listening to the interview section and just thinking, whoa, she has a really unique mind, and the way that her brain works is so interesting. Anyways, so this collection of essays is about homophobia, racism, sexism, and also just a love of literature and how important literature is. I particularly enjoyed the essay about poetry, why poetry is necessary for oppressed groups to feel welcome and like a sense of community, and even just how poetry is necessary for everyone. Poetry is not a luxury, that's what it's called. And it was about how writing and language in terms of expressing yourself is really important, even if people say that it's not that important or not needed. It's just like a frivolous thing to do. It actually does like bind people together and help people feel better in the circumstances that they're in. Whew, my nose is so clogged. Yes, anyways, so my biggest takeaway, honestly, from this book was that Audre Lorde is a genius. It's super cool and has a lot of very relevant perspectives on feminism and racism and homophobia, and especially a combination, and how all of them combine to really affect her life. And I actually have a quote from this collection that I think perfectly summarizes that aspect of it. She writes, "I find I am constantly being encouraged to pluck out some one aspect of myself and present this as the meaningful whole, eclipsing or denying the other parts of self." The next book on my list is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I got this book at the library, so I don't have it, as for most of the books on this list. Really freaking good. I love a good romance, I guess. I never really read romances other than normal people, so this was an exciting adventure for me, and I just loved it. It's the love story between Achilles and Patroclus, um, like from Greek mythology. Just found it very beautiful. It was beautifully written, the prose was really elegant, and it was very sad at the end, obviously. Everyone kind of knows that about this book, I think, that it ends sadly, and you could kind of guess if you know the original, like, Greek myth story that it's not going to end well for these two. But my favorite part wasn't really the end. I find that a lot of people use quotes or ideas from the end of the book to summarize the rest of it, but I liked the beginning. I liked when they were first meeting each other and falling in love, and when they were training together, and just like having a good time and finally getting to be vulnerable with someone. I thought it was really, really beautiful and adorable and cute. I thought it was kind of a nice book to read to review my like Greek mythology knowledge, most of which I picked up from being a giant Percy Jackson fan in my intermediate school years. And it kind of made me feel like maybe I should read the Odyssey now. Now that I've gotten a short little recap, I feel like I can go harder in terms of testing my Greek mythology knowledge, because this kind of laid it out for you, which I thought was really, really nice. And you didn't need to know a lot about Greek mythology going into this, but it was also pretty accurate to everything, except for probably like the gay romance that was added. But I have a quote from this book that I thought was adorable and had me like shrieking and going like this, flipping the book around. So Achilles says Achilles says they never let you be famous and happy. He lifted an eyebrow. I'll tell you a secret, Patroclus. Tell me. I loved it when he was like this. I'm going to be the first. He took my palm and held it to his. Swear it. Why me? Because you're the reason. Swear it. So the next book on my list is Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin, which is a collection of essays. It was probably my least favorite James Baldwin that I've read so far. I've only read The Fire Next Time and Giovanni's Room, and I just loved those two books. So this one wasn't bad at all. Like, Notes of a Native Son was amazing. It just wasn't quite on the level as those two in my mind. Mostly because of the first couple of essays. I thought they were very interesting. In the first couple of essays, he talks about how media portrayal of Black Americans affects Black identity, basically. But the issue with it is that I haven't seen all these, like, old movies, so I kind of felt thrown into these like critical discussions of these movies that I'd never seen, and therefore I didn't find it very interesting because I didn't really know what he was talking about. And I looked up the movies and tried to just kind of piece it together, but since it's not like, they weren't really like a cultural phenomenon now, it's like I didn't know the plot or the characters very well. But then once he started getting into talking about his experiences living all around the world and his experiences with racism in different parts of the world and just general injustice in different parts of the world, I thought that was very interesting. I loved reading about his time spent in Paris. He had such interesting ideas about foreign exchange students and how they act when they're in a different country, particularly France, because France is has such a reputation for being very elegant and sort of academically, I don't know what the word is, like academically superior and kind of, how like American students who go to France act and how it's sort of embarrassing. I thought that was really interesting when he talked about that, and he also talked about the time that he was thrown in jail in France for stealing a mattress and how the French justice system was really like screwed up. And then he talked about his time spent in a Scandinavian country. I think I got that right, where they had like never seen a black person before, and the racism that he felt there, but how it was more ignorant than anything else, and how he felt that the racism he experienced in the United States was more harmful, or at least very different, because it was less rooted in ignorance and more rooted in like knowing ignorant hatred. And I just thought the essays at the end of the collection were really, really interesting, and the beginning I just couldn't get into, and it's my fault because I didn't know anything about the movies or stories that he was talking about and really analyzing, and I'm sure since it's James Baldwin, he had some very interesting things to say. And even not knowing, it was pretty interesting. It just wasn't quite as interesting as it probably could have been if I was a little more educated on the movies at the beginning. But the end was amazing, and just like any collection of essays, I had favorites and least favorites, and it was really good. James Baldwin's a genius, great writer, everyone knows that. Yeah, and I got a quote from one of the essays to read. In overlooking, denying, evading this complexity, which is nothing more than the disquieting complexity of ourselves, we are diminished and we perish. Only within this web of ambiguity, paradox, this hunger, danger, darkness, can we find at once ourselves and the power that will free us from ourselves. It is this power of revelation that is the business of the novelist, this journey towards a more vast reality which must take precedence over other claims. And that's definitely what James Baldwin does, explores the nuances of topics in a way that is, I'd say, generally understandable. I mean, he uses pretty large words and long sentences, but he really dives into the nuances and the complexities of societal issues instead of just painting a very straightforward picture, and that's why his writing's amazing. My nose, Jesus! So the next book on my list I actually have is Bluettes by Maggie Nelson, and I love this. It's so small. Look how small it is. It's about Maggie Nelson and her connection to the color blue, which sounds like a very general topic, but it's actually more of a discussion on how sadness can become very comfortable for people, and her depression, especially following a breakup, and sadness in the lives of others, and how blue connects to sadness, and also just the philosophy of the color blue throughout time, which was super cool. It's a really cool concept. And it's written in a bunch of little numbered fragments. I don't know if you can see. Number fragment. Just over and over again throughout, like it's not written in chapters. I liked how this short little book slowly revealed more and more about her connection with the color blue and her circumstances, because at the beginning it's kind of more general, and it talks more about how famous philosophers have looked at the color blue, or how music throughout history has looked at and explored the color blue. And then as it goes, she dives more into her breakup, her relationship, her friends, like her actual personal connection to the color. My favorite part was when she was talking about her friend who I think was paralyzed from the waist down, or she was very injured. She couldn't walk, and how her friend didn't have I don't know what the word is. Like, she said that there was no threshold for pain. Like, even though her friend was in very difficult circumstances, she still understood that Maggie Nelson was blue, and no hurt is more important than someone else's hurt, which was kind of an idea explored in here, which I thought was really interesting. And I loved her friend. Her friend was so sweet to her, always made sure she felt heard and listened to, and they had very engaging, interesting conversations in this book. Now I'm going to find a little quote. I haven't actually figured out what quote I'm going to use, so I'm going to flip through real quick and choose one. Here's a quote on page 87. It often happens that we treat pain as if it were the only real thing, or at least the most real thing. When it comes around, everything before it, around it, and perhaps in front of it tends to seem fleeting, delusional. Of all the philosophers, Schopenhauer, I definitely don't know how to say that, is the most hilarious and direct spokesperson for this idea. As a rule, we find pleasure much less pleasurable, pain much more painful than we expected. You don't believe him? He offers this quick test. Compare the feelings of an animal engaged in eating another with those of the animal being eaten. The next book on my list was The Course of Love by Alain de Botton. I don't know. It's French. I was watching this super awesome video where this French girl recommends a bunch of books, and it's on some YouTube channel that's all about being French. It's called, like, The Parisian Vibe. And she recommended all these books, and anyways, she recommended this one about love. And this, when I was talking about the mastery of love and how I said it wasn't what I wanted, this was what I wanted. I really liked this book. It explores how relationships work and the complexity of relationships, but not just through like a self-help book. It's more of a story of these two people who are in a relationship, and then throughout it, the author like adds little segments of advice, or through exploring their relationship and their inner thoughts and just like the inner workings of the relationship, there's advice implicitly present, like implied through the writing. And I found that much more engaging and much more effective than a straight just self-help book. It felt very lived and very accurate and very thought through. It also offered a lot of talk about stable relationships being good and still being love. Like, love doesn't have to be constantly exciting and constantly changing for it to be real and fulfilling. And in that, this book talked a lot about marriage, which is obviously not a very relatable topic to me, as I'm 17 years old, but it definitely is relatable to some people. And a quote from it here that I think really encapsulates a lot of the point of the book. We don't need to be constantly reasonable in order to have good relationships. All we need to have mastered is the occasional capacity to acknowledge with good grace that we may, in one or two areas, be somewhat insane. The next book that I read was a collection of poetry by Federico Garcia Lorca. The first Lorca that I read was in my Spanish class this year. We read La Casa de Bernarda Alba, which was really, really good and got me very interested in his writing because I just loved it. I mean, it was a tragedy, and the whole atmosphere, like in the play, I just found really interesting, and the characters were great. I really loved that play. Reading it in Spanish, I think, made it a little harder to get super invested, just because I don't understand Spanish nearly as well as English, but maybe I should reread it in English. I still thought it was really, really good. So I found this amongst my dad's collections of poetry, and I picked it up. I love how it has the Spanish on one side and then the translated English on the other. So I was able to practice my Spanish while I was reading the poems, because any part where I would get to a word that I didn't know, I could just flip over to the English. Or the opposite, if I was reading the English just straight through, I would get to a word in English that I was like, I don't know how to say that in Spanish, so that I could look over to the other side and read it in Spanish. Lorca is an amazing poet. Like, really, really, really good. Great word choice, super interesting in the way that it's written. He writes a lot about, like, wars, the lives of, like, Romanian people, what's the word? Like, wandering, a lot about, like, that's kind of a weird topic, but there is a lot about, like, wandering and, like, forbidden love, culture, war, death in Lorca's work. Forbidden Love makes a lot of sense because I'm pretty sure he was executed for being gay. And it was just really an amazing collection. I don't know how much poetry he has that's not in this book. I should look that up because I might want to read more. But, I mean, I guess if this is selected poems, it's probably the best of the best. I mean, you never know, though. But I really, really loved this. My favorite poem I'm going to find for you right now. Let me wipe my nose. Oh, that is so gross. I just feel so sick. Jeez. Okay. My favorite is called... I'm going to read the title in Spanish because I know how to say it in Spanish better than I know how to sing it in English. Romance Sonambulo. And I don't know how to say it in English. Sonambule Ballad? Sonambule Ballad? I don't know. Okay. Green, how much I want you green. Green wind, green branches, the ship upon the sea, and the horse in the mountain. With the shadow on her waist, she dreams on her balcony. Green flesh, hair of green, and eyes of cold silver. Green, how much I want you green. Beneath the gypsy moon, all the things look at her, but she cannot see them. Green, how much I want you green. Great stars of white frost come with the fish of darkness that opens the road of dawn. The fig tree rubs the wind with the sandpaper of its branches, and the mountain, a filching cat, bristles its bitter aloes. But who will come, and from where? She lingers on her balcony, green flesh, hair of green, dreaming of the bitter sea. Friend, I want to change my horse for your horse, my saddle for your mirror, my knife for your blanket. Friend, I come bleeding from the passes of Cabra. Okay, I should probably skip to the end of this because it's really, really long and I didn't realize how long it was. Friend, where is she? Tell me. Where is your bitter girl? How often she waited for you? How often did she wait for you, cool face, black hair, on this green balcony? Over the face of the cistern the gypsy girl swayed, green flesh, hair of green, with eyes of cold silver. An icicle of the moon suspends her above the water. The night became as intimate as a little square. Drunken civil guards were knocking at the door. Green, how much I want you green. Green wind, green branches, the ship upon the sea, and the horse on the mountain. The next book on my list is Inseparable by Simone de Beauvoir. I don't know how to say it. I still haven't read The Second Sex by her, which I definitely need to do, because that's like one of the most famous feminist texts ever, and I haven't read it. I think I have it in my house. I think it's in my parents' book closet, so I probably should. But Inseparable was a little novel written by Simone that was never published, and it's about the friendship of these two girls, and the one girl has a very strict mother and she's very rich, and it's from the perspective of her best friend. And I just found it really, really interesting, and I loved reading it because it had a lot to do with friendship, and it felt very much like how I feel about a lot of my friends, sort of just looking at them in awe and not to be weird, but looking at them in awe and kind of worshiping how they are and their personality and their skills, and thinking that there's nothing in the world that could be worth them, if that makes sense. The narrator of this book often looks at her friends and sees her friend and sees the circumstances that her friend is in and thinks how much she doesn't deserve to be going through those things, and I just loved reading those sections and reading about the friendship. It was really touching and felt very relatable, and it's not often that you find a book about female friendship that's so wholesome and lovely as this one was. I mean, until the end, but I probably shouldn't have said that. It's kind of spoiler. But yeah, it was super quick, really, really, really short, and very great. And the first thing that I've read by Simone de Beauvoir. The next two books that I read were rereads, so I'm going to go through them quickly, and they're probably my favorite I read this month, but I've already read them, so I don't want to put them in the top two spots, because that feels like cheating. but I've reread Normal People by Sally Rooney and In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. So I've reread Normal People because I broke my foot, as I told you earlier, and Normal People makes me feel better when I'm feeling bad. I think I've read this book like 6 times. It just makes me really, really happy. Connell and Marianne are like the cutest couple ever in the world. Sorry, jeez. If you don't know about Normal People, it's about these 2 kids. They start off in high school. Marianne's super unpopular, super not well-liked, but very wealthy. And she has a very hard family life. And Connell's super popular, has a very loving mom, but does not have a lot of money. And so it's about their relationship. They start a relationship. It's a secret one because Connell's embarrassed of Marianne, which causes problems, obviously. And then they go to college, and they go to the same school, and they rekindle, but then the dynamic really switches because they're going to a fancy school, Trinity College in Dublin, which I want to go there so bad so I can be like these 2. But, oh my god, my nose is so clogged. But Marianne gets really popular because she has all the wealth, and she's very, and so does everyone else at that school, so she runs with, like, the higher social circles, and they all love her. And Connell becomes the less popular one, but they still end up, like, just always coming back to each other. There's so many issues with miscommunication in this book. Like, if these 2 just talk to each other, so many problems would be solved, but they never just sit down and talk to each other. And it's kind of frustrating, but also very realistic. Because I feel like a lot of people are like that. I feel like I'm like that. I just sometimes don't really bring up how I'm really feeling in this. I also like how it talks about, like, power dynamics within relationships and within, like, sexual situations, because Marianne is into kind of, more BDSM stuff, but Connell doesn't want to hurt her, and it's questioned and kind of explored whether this comes from her more brutal relationship with her family, and I think that is very interesting. And then let me do the last little section. I'm going to do a quote that kind of summarizes the whole book. Oh, let me wipe my nose again. This is so gross. I'm so sick. All these years, they've been like 2 little plants sharing the same plot of soil, growing around one another, contorting to make room, taking certain unlikely positions. But in the end, she has done something for him. She's made a new life possible, and she can always feel good about that. From the end of the book. It's really, really a good book. If you haven't read it, you should read it because I've read it 6 times. Actually, maybe I've read it enough for the both of us, but I don't know. I really love it. It never fails to make me happy and also make me sad, but make me sad in a way that makes me happy. If that makes sense. So, yeah, I reread that this month because it was a rough time. And then I reread In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, which is a work of genius. Carmen Maria Machado is a genius. I'm seeing her speak soon, which is why I reread this, and she's talking about this book. I also love Her Body and Other Parties, and I've read, like, everything else she's written. Right now I'm listening to a collection about what certain authors never talk to their mothers about because she has an essay in it. I've read Carmilla, which she wrote an introduction for because she wrote an introduction for it. I just think she's totally a genius. This book is about an abusive relationship, but she compares the relationship to a lot of tropes within traditional, like, horror stories. And the dream house is the house in which the abusive relationship took place. It's written as, like, it says dream house as romance novel, dream house as deja vu, dream house as whatever, so on and so forth. And all the little sections are so interesting. She does a great job with her use of language, really encapsulating an abusive relationship and also discussing the complexities of being in a gay relationship that's abusive and how she doesn't want to fit into stereotypes, and also just in general how like oppressed groups don't want to fit into stereotypes molded for them, so they don't want to speak up about their bad situations. Yeah, she's a genius with words. I loved it. Probably one of my favorites of the month, but it was a reread, so I don't want to put it as my favorite. And here's a quote from In the Dream House. There is a... Oh, God, I should look up how to say this. There's a Quichua ritual, El que me nombra me rompe. Whatever names me breaks me. The solution, your course, is silence. But the truth is, anyone who knows your name can break you in two. Which is so terrifying. Also, there's this section in this book where she does a choose-your-own-adventure story. Her use of tropes is just so amazing. This page breaks my heart. So it's like you flip through the pages to try to escape the cycle of abuse. That's basically what it's symbolizing. And on page 167 it says, you shouldn't be on this page. There's no way to get here from the choices given to you. You flipped here because you got sick of the cycle. You wanted to get out. You're smarter than me. Go to page 171. Yeah, it's just really terrifying and a really great book. Carmen Maria Machado is a genius. I already said that. Oh, also, it's written in second perspective, so the audience is addressed as if you are her, which I found really interesting and really engaging to read. Okay, now we've made it to my top book of February. I listened to this book, and it's called Want Me by Tracy Clark Flory. And, I forgot what the specific title is. It's like Want Me, a exploration of desire from a sex writer. This is kind of an awkward book to talk about, but it was really, really great. It was about how kind of, if we're using like traditional binary genders, how women tend to change themselves and change how they act sexually to be what they see fit as what men desire. But in the end, Tracy was discussing how not all men desire the same things despite what the media tells you, and how sex should be for the pleasure of the people, both people involved, and not just one. It was a lot about really the male gaze in general. Every time I say the male gaze, I think of like the male gaze. I don't know, it just sounds like it. The male gaze in general, and how it affects women and how it ends up tearing down their self-esteem the more they try to fit towards it, but how often it really, really feels as a woman like it's your deepest desire to strive for fitting in the male gaze. Like it feels like you're choosing it, even if it's not necessarily true that you are, and it is more societal implications. It felt very feminist, like it was researched very well. You could tell she knew what she was talking about. It was also very interesting and funny at times, and also insanely sad at times. I felt myself like crying while reading it, which is kind of dramatic for me, especially since it's a nonfiction. Someone just made a noise. It was also romantic at times when she ended up getting together with her final partner at the end. I guess that's a spoiler, but also it's her real life, so I don't know if it's really a spoiler. And I loved how personal it was to her story, because she wasn't trying to make general, broad, sweeping statements about everyone. She was just more talking about her own experience and seeing how much all of that could be relatable to the reader. Just like throwing it out there and seeing what sticks. And it turns out that because many people are affected by like the society around sex and the male gaze, it ends up being pretty relatable to a lot of readers, even if readers aren't like sex writers, like going and doing and observing crazy like parties and stuff. You know, I'm sure most readers reading it aren't sex writers. I guess some could be. But it's more her story and her perspective and the unique perspective she offers because she's been told to go like speak with sex workers so much and gone to like BDSM parties, and she only really addresses those things a few times. It's my brother's playing music. A few times it's mostly her talking about more generally applicable circumstances. Yeah, I thought it was really genius, and I have a quote from this one too that I think summarizes it well that I need to say quickly since there's music coming from the other room. I wanted to be wanted, and I wanted to want more than to be wanted. And it's called Want Me, so that quote used a lot of the word want. Anyways, I would highly recommend listening to this book too because Tracy Clark Flory actually reads it. Oh, another very interesting part is when she talked about her parents and what her parents told her about sex in comparison to what she ended up finding online at a young age, and how it was really conflicting and it messed with her whole perception about herself. Yeah, anyways, really, really great book. It was my #1 new read of this month. And I also really, really loved a lot of the other books that I read this month, as I'm sure you can tell by my raving reviews. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't really have that many physical books, but... Okay.